Let's try talking to David in Queensland, Australia. David, you're live with Eric and V.
Hello again.
Hi, V. Hi, Eric. How are you going?
Doing all
Going
right.
good.
I'm exhausted, honestly. I need caffeine, but that's all right. What would you like to talk about today?
Pretty well the same. I rang up last week and we were talking about God and fairness, and we were just starting to explore that. And V was asking some great questions, and I was enjoying the conversation. So if we could continue with that.
Sounds good. I'm down.
Yeah. Are you using a headset or something? Because it's sounding really tinny on your side right now.
Yes, I am using a headset.
Okay. Well, we'll do our best. Okay. So what today would you like to talk about?
I think V was talking about, starting to talk about the idea that God defines fairness, or he defines what's right and wrong, and is that fair?
Okay.
All right.
What do you think?
So, I think probably the idea is that if God creates beings capable of morality and accountability at that time, he himself can also be held accountable. So I don't see that God is the being who solely defines what is right and wrong, and so we get a chance to judge that ourselves. Does that sound fair?
It sounds interesting. I don't know if I've heard that before, that God doesn't define what's right and wrong. If not, then why have God in the picture at all? Because I know a lot of the argument from morality and all of that kind of rely on the idea that we need a God in order to understand or achieve morality. So if you're saying that we don't necessarily need God for that, then why put God into the equation at all?
I am saying that God does define morality, but not in an unquestionable way, in a way that we can question, and that there's an argument that's broken out as to whether God is fair, whether he is right, whether he is moral, and now we get the chance to question that. And if he is the God who puts us, if he judges us, then we get to judge him.
Okay. Is it possible that your God could be unfair?
There is a possibility, and that's why the whole thing is being questioned at the moment, yes.
Okay. So if your God was unfair or unjust, would you still pray to them?
I think I would have an adverse reaction to that, and if that was the case, no, I would disagree, and I wouldn't think that he would be worthy of worship.
Well, cheers. Okay. So how do you
So yeah, how do we get there? So if you're saying that it's possible that God is not fair and we have the ability to judge that, then how do we jump there? What's going to get you from God is fair to God isn't fair and I won't worship him anymore?
Well, there was a rebellion in heaven where Lucifer rebelled against God, so the whole question of the fairness of God has been opened up. And so now every single thing that God's doing is on show before the whole universe. And so every being capable of morality is looking, is what God's doing fair or not? And we will get our turn to say whether or not God is fair after this life, and we will be able to cast our vote.
Okay, what happens if we decide God isn't fair? Does that change the power dynamic? Because I feel like by itself, that's not fair. That if we are given the opportunity to judge God and God judges us, but God's the only one who gets to do anything with that judgment. And if we say, God, you're not fair, it's like, oh, tough beans, you're still going to hell. That doesn't sound very fair. So what happens if we all decide God isn't fair? We're not going to worship you anymore. Is God still all powerful? Does he still get to decide what happens to our eternal souls?
So in that case, I would think that the whole of the universe who is believing that God's fair, has evidence of those who are directly involved in the happenings on earth saying God isn't fair, they would have to basically take our word for it as well. And I think there would be a rebellion right across the whole universe. He would lose the respect and adoration of all beings.
So would God then become kind of defunct like some of the gods and religions that we no longer practice? Just a dead God? And we'd... Because I guess this is an interesting conversation, and I could go down this rabbit hole all day and just say what if, but I think a lot of where I'm coming from is, well, why are we having this conversation in the first place? This feels very out of character for a lot of theists that I've talked to. Like this whole idea of we will decide whether or not God gets to survive as God and be deemed good is very unorthodox. So I guess my question is, how do you know that this is going to happen, that there would be a rebellion across the universe and that we are in a position to judge a being that we frankly don't believe exists? Can we kind of get back to basics here and talk a little bit more about how you know this stuff?
That's kind of where I'm sitting too, is y'all are talking about the fairness of God, and while that's interesting, especially that viewpoint, I'm with V on that. You brought up, well, Lucifer, of course, led a rebellion against God in heaven. I mean, we all know that. I know that's a story, but no. I mean, how could you make a claim like that? Could you show me heaven? Have you seen heaven? Do you know heaven even exists? And then, I mean, all of the pieces, that take place in that story, Lucifer and rebellion. What does rebellion look like? All of these things are part of this mythos that you're pre-packaging in. But I would love to take that apart and look at it a little bit and go, how do you know that heaven's even a thing?
Yes, we are assuming the story from the Bible, if I'm allowed to call it a story. In Revelation chapter 12, it talks that there was a rebellion in heaven, so that's where we get that from. Jesus is the one who said, do not judge, otherwise you will be judged. There's a concept that God judges us. And if he is to abide by that word, then we also get to judge him. God has a claim that he's...
So I'm with you on that. I'm totally with you on that. We granted that so we could talk about the fairness part. And I think we both agree. I mean, V, I don't know. Do you want to take it down the is God an asshole route, or do we want to talk about whether or not heaven even exists?
I mean, there's really no debate in terms of my mind about whether or not God's an asshole. If God exists, then God's an asshole. That's something I'm going to not care to debate, because that's kind of the conversation I've had with most theists, is whether or not God is moral. But I mean, though, like, my concern here is that you are bringing us, okay, well, here are some stories and here are some phrases from this book that is an amalgamation of books that were written across hundreds and thousands of years by authors we don't know. And if we pick this verse and this verse from this time period and this time period and this culture and this culture, then we can come up with any story, really. So what makes these particular verses more impactful than verses that would, if put together in a different way, say something completely different?
I think the whole issue is quite complex, and sometimes when we get one picture of God, what happens is people just take one line of verses and sort of ignore another line of verses. So I'm not trying to just take one line of verses to show one aspect. We need to take all of those things in order to get a complete picture of who God is. So it's a complex picture, not a simplistic one.
Well, I don't know how complex you need it to be. How many genocides, how many good things do you need to do to balance out a genocide?
Right. Like Andrew Torres asked in one of the last episodes, how many puppies do you need to kill to be considered a bad guy? Like,
yeah, what's the other end of that? I mean, there are people starving and dying, especially right now, with a global pandemic that's wiping out thousands of people across the world. that doesn't seem like the act of a very nice person, especially if that person had the power to not do that or to fix it.
So,
How do you resolve that God character not being a total monster?
yeah, that's a great question. This world, when it was first created, according to the story, was Adam and Eve were given dominion of the world.
Bullshit.
And then
Right, but
when they obeyed...
No.
here's the thing. Like we agree that it's a story, right? We are agreeing on the fact that there is a story that says this, but for some reason you believe it and we don't. And before we can get into why we should what the story says or how we should apply it to our understanding of the world, you have to convince us that it's more than just a story, unless you don't believe it's more than just a story either. Do you consider it just a story, or do you consider it something more?
With the Adam and Eve story, are you asking him if he thinks it's like a literal or not?
Well, no, like during this whole conversation, talking about the story in Revelation of the rebellion in heaven, or the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, we can agree that they are stories, but we think they're just stories. And you seem to be thinking that there's something more. And before we can get into what these stories mean, I need to know why you think they're something we should consider as more than just stories.
Yes, I do believe that they are more than just stories. I do believe that they are history, actually.
Okay. So let's
there's no particular thing yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. We're taking it from two different sides, and you're not able to answer. That's not very fair to you. Go ahead.
So it's not one particular reason why I would be believing. I would say a percentage of it would be the experience of faith as I apply the principles of these things in my life. I have a growing faith, which is a process. I have some problems, I guess, with ideas in evolution. I also belong to a denomination that has a person who receives messages from God, and those messages seem very convincing, and that's modern day time with people who witnessed those, and so I'm fairly convinced because of that as well.
That's
interesting.
A lot of stuff to break down.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to drop the nature of the God, and we'll move on to talking about why you believe, because that sounds like fun. So where do we even want to start? Personal testimony. So let's say I brought you a claim of a miracle, right? And I said,
okay.
Yeah, I said, David, I saw someone rise from the dead. Therefore, I'm the CEO of a company. Would that make sense to you?
I'm not sure how those two would be related, so no.
I agree. What about somebody saying that they had a miracle claim, therefore the Bible is true?
Not necessarily. I don't think that miracles necessarily can prove the Bible is true.
Okay, well, that's good. That's definitely consistent. So, I mean, we can drop the Bible entirely and talk about other things if you don't believe in the Bible. Do you believe that the Bible is true?
Yes, I do believe that the Bible's true, but I don't believe that we can always just trust miracles.
Okay, that's good. I don't think we should trust them at all, because it's one of those things that when you zoom in on it enough, it just goes away. So other than miracles, then, why do you believe? You said you believe because you saw things. Like what?
Yeah, what are some of these messages that your prophet person, leader of church, has given you that are convincing?
Because I mean, what was it? The Haley-Bopp comet and the cult that all committed suicide because they drank poisoned Flavor Aid because their prophet told them that aliens were going to come and pick them up. Like, I think that the words of prophets or people who purport to be prophets is pretty freaking important to very carefully scrutinize, or else you run the risk of other people being hurt or taken advantage of.
Yes, I agree. It's a pretty big claim, so you have to be very careful because it can be very dangerous. So the prophet here writes about things to do or not to do for good health, and most of us are vegetarians, if not actually vegans, and we have a lifespan that's on average 10 years longer, up to 10 years longer than the general public, to such an extent that even one of the areas where there's a concentration of our believers is actually called one of the blue zones. It's noted for its longevity.
Well, there are a couple things to tease out there. Number one, I absolutely agree that there's value in community. And I think that that's a big piece of what keeps people alive longer. But I don't know how you can justify. Do you think it's their religiosity or what they believe? Do you think that that's the same for people who believe in other religions like Islam? Help me kind of get a better picture of this.
So we as a denomination, we're given advice on how to live healthfully, and following those rules of health, basically we end up living 5 to 10 years longer than the general public.
Like what?
Not smoking, not drinking, being a vegetarian or a vegan, getting some adequate sunshine, fresh air, drinking lots of water, and generally just having a great attitude about life.
David, what's your religion?
I'm a Seventh-day Adventist.
What?
The Seventh-day Adventist?
Seventh-day Adventist.
Oh, Seventh-day Adventist. Okay. I've been there. I've been to one of those services before. Everybody's really nice. They all walked up and shook my hand and remembered my name. But I had a friend who actually was shunned by their community and aren't allowed to talk to their family anymore. Is that a thing that happens, or is that just a special situation that happened with my friend?
I find that highly unusual. No, that's not a general thing, really. We're just accepting pretty well of all people wherever they're at, and shouldn't really be shunning people who leave. We greatly value a person's personal freedom and a person's rule over their own conscience.
Okay, so you don't take part in those group dynamics. That's good. I don't know a whole lot else about Seventh-day Adventists. I know that my church definitely pushed for us to tell on each other and for us to watch each other to see if we were behaving immorally. Is that something that happens in your church? I'm interested.
Yeah, I think that is something that does often happen in a lot of communities, but no, that should not be happening. I mean, we're responsible for our own behaviour, and we're responsible for kindly helping other people out if they want help. But we're not meant to be watching one another. No.
That's good. Okay. I don't know where to go with this. V, what do you think?
I'm curious if you got this information about the positives of not smoking and not drinking and drinking lots of water from a prophet or from science. Like, it seems like whatever, like someone could do all those things and not believe what you believe and still live 5 to 10 years longer, right?
Yes, that is correct. So anyone can do these things. Yes, you don't have to be religious.
Okay, so are you using doing these things as proof that your religion is accurate, or I'm confused about how lifestyle changes interacts with the truth claim of your religion?
Because these tips on health were given to our prophet in a vision, and in about the 1860s. And so we've more or less held to these things since that time, which is well before we understood what was going on with smoking and many of the other health issues. So we've had this for, a century and a half.
I don't. Okay, so how did you vet your prophet? Could your prophet have been wrong? How, like, why do you believe that? I mean, there are more recent people who call themselves prophets, and do you believe those people? Like, how did you vet your particular person?
Well, first of all, if one believes in the Bible, then the prophet has to agree with the Bible. But also, the
Paul says
life
to
the
drink
prophet
wine.
leads has.
What?
Paul says to drink wine. That seems to contradict what your prophet says about drinking alcohol, right?
So wine can be both alcoholic and non-alcoholic. We don't believe that the command to the idea to drink wine was the alcoholic version. That's just grape juice.
I mean, I agree Manischewitz is shit, but I don't call it grape juice. It's way better with a studio audience. I'm sorry, David. That just fell flat. Okay, so grape juice. That's disappointing. It says wine, but I'll okay. What about shellfish?
That would be considered unclean food, so no.
So no lobsters, no shrimp, none of that?
Yes, no, because they're sort of at the bottom of the food chain, and they tend to be cleaning up a lot of the rubbish at the bottom of the ocean. And the further down the food chain you are, the more likely you are to get concentrated amounts of chemicals and other stuff that is toxic to us. So, the further up the food chain you eat, the less concentration of harmful things you might be eating.
So do you believe all of the Mosaic laws are still in place? Mixing fabrics,
planting crops next to each other, stoning your children. Doesn't seem to promote longer life, that one.
Well,
so I would say that we believe that the Ten Commandments are still in place, and a lot of the Mosaic law might be more applicable to Israel's specific situation, not so much applicable to our specific situation today, because
how do you make that distinction?
We are no longer a theocracy. The Ten Commandments was written by the finger of God himself, whereas the Mosaic law was written by Moses. The Ten Commandments was kept inside of the ark. The Mosaic law was kept beside the ark. So there is a distinction between the two. And today, we are not a theocracy.
It's true. But I'm sorry, there are so many things that are bouncing up against my own faith history that I'm just I feel like I don't even know where to grab on. Can I take this back to your prophet, please? Because I'm still super confused. How did you vet your prophet? You said your prophet believes in the Bible. Whoop-de-doo. How did you believe? I mean, if I told you I believed in the Bible, would you believe the next words that came out of my mouth? Like, how did you get there?
Well, she had visions in front of audiences of tens and hundreds and on occasion thousands of people. Okay. In some of these visions, she actually demonstrated superhuman strength. She was not breathing whatsoever. She never blinked. Her movements were unable to be hindered in any way when she was in vision. So it was obviously a supernatural occurrence. Other people who came along said, well, yeah.
No, I mean, you understand at the time you have this spiritualist movement, right? You have this, huge group of people who would do things just like that. I mean, you had shows of it. There were people who said that they could do that when they contacted spirits. Like, I mean, have you looked into spiritualism? Have you looked into that whole history? Because none of those things are special. I mean, if I told you that I have,
so they did happen as well.
Yeah. So how did you vet yours?
So that is only enough of a demonstration to maybe start thinking, is this supernatural? So an agreement with the Bible would be the test as to whether it's spiritualism and of evil spirits, or whether it's of God. So that would be the distinguishing idea from the Bible.
I'm sorry. Let me be very, very clear here. I'm talking about hucksters. I'm talking about people who take advantage of others, who are way too gullible and use it to assert themselves in positions of authority and to take money and power.
Also, the majority of people at that time were Christian of some version or another. So the spiritualist movement was not an anti-Christian one. It was one that corresponded more often than not with understandings of heaven and hell and demons and angels and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So accordance with the Bible doesn't seem to be a good way to determine that, because that would leave you with maybe all of them to decide between.
Also, looking at a person's life, are they kind? Are they generous? Are they living a good moral life? That will be another way to determine it as well.
No, hold on. Whether or not somebody lives a life that's good does not justify moral or supernatural claims. I could be.
Nor does it mean that they have anything to do with God whatsoever, honestly. I mean,
I mean, you could follow me around and I live a perfect life. That doesn't mean that if I told you I was, Superman, you should believe me. So no, those things are entirely unrelated. Do you understand that?
Yes, for the supernatural claim, that's why we were talking about that she had supernatural strength, and she could be envisioned for like half an hour and she was not breathing at all. So that would be the side of the supernatural claim.
So just to be clear, the difference between supernaturalism and it being religious is one holds up the Bible and the other doesn't. Is that what you're saying?
The Bible is used to determine the source of the supernatural power. Okay. And we were just talking about these other features to say that it's supernatural.
Right. Do you think somebody can have supernatural power without the Bible? Are there other sources?
Yes.
There are. Like what? Are there other gods?
Yes. The Lucifer, the devil, he can give supernatural capability as well.
Okay.
I feel like we've come very far from fairness and God, honestly.
Well, I mean, we could have talked about the fairness part, but we instead talked about how absolutely, like, you I mean, I'm sure you don't need us to tell you that some of this stuff sounds pretty bonkers, right?
No, I understand that it sounds pretty crazy.
Okay. Well, I mean, the thing is we're trying to understand where you're at and why you're there. And so far, the reasoning you've then agreed is not good reasoning, right? I don't understand how you could possibly be brought in by someone sat in a vision for 30 minutes. I've worked with people who have different, psychological and mental disabilities, people who have visions daily. We diagnose them when we get them proper medical treatment. And you're describing a time when people would use shows of force. You'd have a few plants in the crowd and, oh, I'm just wrestling them away, I'm super, super strong. I mean, those were things that happened. So I don't understand how you are convinced. It just blows my mind. And then where the powers come from, it's amazing to me, man. Why should we believe?
I'm not so much sharing this to try and convince other people. I guess my hope was just to share something about God and his fairness, so that if the time came and you started to believe in the supernatural, that you would have a framework to fall back on that would make some sense.
Okay. So making sense of things and understanding them to be supernatural. So I think the onus is to show supernatural before you can make that a reasonable conclusion to come to, right?
Yes, however, other people do come to the realization of the supernatural themselves, which is not my objective here. And at that time, then they say, well, I want to understand it. So sharing and understanding can be helpful. Plus, I think it's helpful for us just to have a conversation.
Got you. I'll ask the question again. You understand that to posit the supernatural as an explanation for a thing, you need to show that the supernatural is possible before you can attribute to, probability to it, right? Because I can show you a whole lot of ways to fake the claims that you're making. I have not yet seen a way to show it in a supernatural way. I've seen those claims. I've seen strongman, shows and that kind of stuff. I've seen it faked plenty. You would have to show actual supernatural powers for it to be likely for something to be supernatural, right? Can you show us?
Yeah.
Natural?
So I guess what I am saying here is that I do believe the eyewitnesses who saw these things at the time. That would mean I would have to trust the eyewitnesses. Yes.
Okay. Why do you not trust eyewitnesses from other cults?
I think often because they're put on for a show, whereas this here was not just put on for a show necessarily. And the intent was for the benefit of people through the information that was given to do with healthful living, which is borne out in the longevity of Seventh-day Adventists worldwide.
Okay. Wait, you're saying that going into a trance or a vision in front of tens and hundreds and maybe thousands of people and putting on shows of strength wasn't a show? That sounds exactly like a show to me. That sounds like somebody who is garnering attention on purpose.
Well, you would have to look at the motive of the person themselves. That would be, you would have to ascribe motive. I don't think that we can just go and ascribe motive. My belief is that that wasn't the motive because of the benefit that these people tried to give others at great cost to themselves.
Okay. How about L. Ron Hubbard? The Church of Scientology.
Sorry, say again?
The Church of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard. If you got to a certain operating thetan level, you were supposed to be virtually, unable to get ill. You were supposed to live for way longer. You were supposed to have all of these abilities. It was supposed to help you in your health. How did you decide that L. Ron Hubbard was a false prophet and yours was a true one?
I haven't really had a look at Mr. Hubbard, but the one with Ellen White is practical experience that you don't have to be a theist. Anyone can follow it. It's for all people.
Okay, that's the same. Dianetics was something that is absolutely something that the Church of Scientology wants everyone to follow. For all people.
Yeah, honestly, David, you dismissed other prophets and other people with making claims and putting on shows because you said that, oh well, they were just putting on shows for the fun of it, or you basically ascribed them motive and dismissed them as a whole. And then when we talked about your prophet, you were like, oh well, we can't ascribe motive to people, so we can't know for sure. So you kind of nixed your own argument there. So honestly, if we're going to go anywhere, I'd like to go back to how do you know that this one was right and all the others are wrong if we're not ascribing motive to anybody?
Okay, fair point. Thanks for pointing that out. The only other piece of evidence that comes to mind at this stage is that at that time it took a couple of weeks for letters to travel around the world. Ellen White would often write letters from one country to another, and when that letter would arrive at its destination, oftentimes in that letter, it was containing events that had just happened hours before in quite some detail, say who was in the meeting, who spoke, who said what, quoting their precise words. Yet the letter was written several weeks beforehand, and it was opened up when the person received it, and they read the very words that had been said only a few hours earlier. So she said that I saw these things in vision. I actually saw these people talk, and I'm telling you what was said in the meeting.
Okay. Is it more likely that this person had a vision, or that this person was playing a trick on people, that this person is a con artist? Because that...
I'm not sure how...
I mean, are you saying you could not imagine how a con artist would do that? You could not imagine that somebody would have an associate on the other side that filled things in or swapped the letters? I mean, that stuff happens.
I guess there's always a way.
Like if you go to some of these spiritualists that will put on these shows, like you have, did it not occur to you that this person could be a con artist? Because at that point, you do ascribe motive. This person isn't just mentally ill, right? This person is actually taking advantage of other people. I mean, we have evidence of con artists.
Right. At this point, David, it's less we're going to ascribe motive to this person because we dislike her, or we don't trust her, or we don't want to believe what you believe. It's more along the lines of, okay, well, this thing allegedly happened. I personally would like to see one of these letters and then see how it was corroborated, so that I could see that this was more than just a story. But even if I were to see this letter and it was supposedly relating events that had happened weeks after it had been written, we've got the options of saying, okay, well, how do we explain this? And for us, our approach is to say, okay, the most reasonable explanation would probably be something we have evidence for already. One of these things is, hey, mentalists do this. Hey, con artists do this. Hey, when I was 12, I had a sibling deliver a letter that made it seem like I had overheard a conversation from my friend, and it wasn't true, but, they tricked them. That's a thing that people can do and have done. And on the other hand, we have supernatural ability, which has not been proven as even a potential viable option to us. So for us, our first instinct is to go, okay, well, I've seen evidence of this in one area, so we're going to go with this explanation until we can at least determine that the other one is an option. So we go back again to, how do you determine that the supernatural exists? Because we can only agree that that's a possible option for this after you've proven to us that it is viable.
What we said.
But
yes.
we also have been on this call for a good time. And we do want to get to other callers. I do want to talk to you, David. I think it would be fun for you to call back. And in the meantime, we do have a Discord. We do have a Facebook. So definitely talk with people there. And we look forward to hearing back from you.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Take care. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize we're halfway through the episode. Gee, this is my favorite part of the week, and we're just shooting. Okay.